Folks, welcome back to the iHealth channel, iHealth Radio, with your host, Hurricane H. New day, new show, great topic, awesome guest, someone that we were supposed to have a show a couple of weeks back, but he had to deliver a baby. He had a baby, literally. So I thought it was his baby, but it turned out that he just delivered because that's his job. So I'm starting with
Right.
that one. Well, with me, I have Dr. Robert Biter. He's an MD, but he specializes in obstetrics and gynecology. So that's his craft, but specifically holistic stuff. So we're going to talk about, holistic OBGYN and healthcare and infants and babies and motherhood and all the stuff, maybe nutrition, all the stuff that we need to know about. And I think this topic really is important to everyone because we all have been born into this world by someone. And somebody had helped into that birthing. And then also, we all potentially may have our own children and so on and so forth. So we need to be really mindful about this process and this whole thing, and specifically the holistic part. So, Doctor, may I call you Robert? How do you want me to
Yeah.
call you that?
Rob is fine. Robert,
Robert?
Robert is fine.
Oh, well, I mean,
Whatever.
you earned your MD, so I mean, I'm going to call you Dr. Rob. How about that?
Okay. Okay.
All right, all right. How you doing? Well, I know that you're in
I'm
the
great.
future right now.
Yes, I am. Yeah. So I'm currently in Phuket, Thailand. I've been here in Thailand for 4 years. I left the United States 7 years ago to really to change my life, to do something different and to expand internationally. I'd spent some time in a small hospital in California trying to make change. And as you might guess, uh, hospitals don't like to change, and doctors don't like to be told that there's a better way. And so I grew tired of the struggle. I grew tired of trying to change a system that didn't want to change. And also, the world's a big place. And I had been on call every day for many, many years. I could never be very far from the hospital. And I wanted to see the world. So I left 7 years ago and I moved initially to Mexico. I lived in Tulum, Mexico, where I worked with Patera, a midwife, there, and did some work with some at-risk kids as well. Did some education for them, and perfected my Spanish a bit more, and
Hola.
and then it moved, and then I've been moving since then, and I haven't stopped. Thailand's been the longest that I've been in these past 7 years. Part of that was because of the epidemic and the pandemic. And part of that is because we're opening the very first freestanding birthing center in the Kingdom of Thailand. And so that's taken a little bit of my time in between catching babies to really focus on that. Next step is we're moving to Australia, to the Gold Coast, where we're going to build the very first freestanding birthing center in Australia. And we hope to continue that process around the world so that women have an opportunity to give birth in a way that is beautiful and safe and sacred and loving.
No, Doc, you've touched on quite a bit in a very, couple of minutes, because there's a lot of stuff that we can really kind of take from at least the introduction here. One, first of all, I mean, you've selected I guess, I think I would say a noble medical, piece of the practice, because I mean, you're not giving life, but you're bringing life to the world, literally. As the people come on into this particular world, you're there up front, making sure it's safer and so on and so forth. Now, you did mention something interesting about hospitals and how change is difficult, how administration could be a little bit of a difficult thing. Now, again, I have experience personally with hospitals and systems because being in the insurance space, we are typically always run by some sort of hospital or provider, group. So in my last 30 years, pretty much every company I worked for, they had some affiliation or ownership, of a hospital system or plenty of hospitals together in one, group type of thing. And you're right, it is a bureaucratic red tape system, very heavy administrative. there's cost, there's, there's financials, profitability, there's all these things that are taken, in place. And, there's risk, there's all that stuff. And you're right. It's very difficult environment. You cannot really dictate how things are done. You're being dictated how things should be done because that's, the powers that be want it a certain way and you have to deliver it that way. I mean, no pun intended. but really you deliver it, the process that's being given to you as opposed to what you would think it's done. And if you challenge that, that's always going to be a place. I mean, by the way, everyone that challenges a system will always probably have a difficult time because you're going to hit a lot of blocks and just resistance. And again, it's in the real world, you want to swim with the current, but there's times where you just want to just switch the actual, place, and that's it. You go where there's no current, right? I think that's what you did. But you've worked in the standard westernized, birthing system, which is basically hospital driven, deliveries and so on and so forth. And there is, and I can share this with you. When my first daughter, well, not my first, but my only daughter, because I have my older son was my first, but my only daughter was, coming to the world, the doctor or the OBGYN doctor was notorious of only doing C-sections, cesareans. That's it. I mean, and the reason being simple is the math, let's just face it, it's the money. You get about 6,000 per delivery. You don't have to sweat. You don't have to be on call. You book it,
Go
you
home.
show up.
Yeah.
That's it. You come, you cut, you suture and you go home. That's it. It's a done deal and it's an easy, but there's a lot of ramifications to those things. And we can talk from your medical perspective and why holistic is the key to go. And I think that is also, the traditional way is an art that is being lost, in today's world. I mean, historically, that's how it's been, right? But so let's talk about that, like the difference between, the system today and the system before, how it all plays and how did we get there? I mean, here today, like where that is not really the primary way of doing things.
Well, it's interesting. For me, I grew up the different perspective of medicine altogether. I was a poor kid. Wouldn't have been expected to be able to go to college, let alone medical school. And I was given a chance. When I was 17, my father died of colon cancer at the age of 40. He was misdiagnosed at age 36. And ironically, I went to medical school at the very same place where the doctors who couldn't save my father were my professors. So very on, I had a different perspective that medicine is not about necessarily saving lives. We're about helping people to live the best life they can in between birth and death. And those two moments of birth and death are the ones that we do the worst at supporting. We're afraid of them because they are the times when we're really not that in control. My job as a holistic OBGYN is to support women, to be there, to offer my experience, to teach them that they have the power to birth their baby. The name of our birthing center is Dando a Luz, which is Spanish. It's the traditional phrase to describe birth, which literally means to give the light. Think about that. If women believed they were giving the light, if their partners believed that is what was happening, that there was light coming onto this planet, the word illumination is surrounded around birth. It's around the birth of the actual placenta. And so we took that from women. When I was working in California, I had a predominantly Spanish population, right? I initially worked in a nonprofit setting, and many of the women were, their first language was Spanish. Not a single one of them used the phrase dando a luz. They used parto, which is labor, work. It's a masculine verb to describe the only thing that women can do that we can't. And so I guess for me, I've seen that transition. The final straw for me in leaving the hospital setting was that they were bringing in doctors who were, I think, almost anti-women. This group of doctors had gone all the way to the state Supreme Court in California to defend their choice to not care for a woman because she was gay. And they brought that group in to oversee care for women in this hospital. And I quickly realized that by staying, by playing the games, I was acquiescing. I was making that okay. And so that's the philosophical aspect of why I do what I do. But even having said that, during these 7 years of travel, I am so hopeful for a return to natural, safe care for women and babies. The younger generation, that these younger women who are having babies, they intuitively trust their bodies. They're the majority of the women who come to me they've never thought about going to a hospital for a birth. They're having home births, or they're having birthing center births, because they want what is normal, what is natural. If you're sick, you go to the hospital. But if you're not sick, you will be when you go to a hospital, or you will made to be sick. We don't do a good job of allowing people to be born or even to die peacefully and lovingly. I was just helping a family say goodbye to a loved one. And, I had to talk to the younger doctors who were there at the hospital to reassure them that it was okay, that a patient is going to die, because there wasn't a cure. And she wanted to die with dignity and without an intubation and without having her body shocked and pounded on. And so I'm hopeful that we are returning to that place, right? Like, we can talk about the statistics. We can talk about maternal morbidity and mortality in the United States. We're the most expensive place in the world to give birth. And yet our outcomes are worse than most developing countries. There are places in the United States where women have to travel further for obstetric care than in Africa. So there is an opportunity now for something new. And that's really what I hope to do. I hope to bring that back to the United States at some point, even though I love traveling. But I know that there is a space, there is now a need, because hospitals cannot give the care that is needed. Hospitals should do what hospitals do: take care of sick people. That's where you go to have major surgery. It's not even where you go to have elective surgery anymore, right? Insurance companies in the United States, they won't even approve elective surgery in a hospital unless you don't have an ambulatory surgery center available. So there's a recognition that we can do this better, with better outcomes, with less infections, with less premature births, with less postpartum bleeding, and less expensive for families, less expensive for insurance companies, less expensive for society in general, because women get back to their lives. They have a baby and it's a normal process, and they heal and they get back to their lives. They're not in a hospital for a week because they have a huge incision in their abdomen, or because they have postpartum hemorrhage from being induced, they're being given too much medicine to force their uterus to contract, and it gets tired and it can't clamp down and stop bleeding after birth. So I think change is coming, right? And for me to be able to do this around the world, to be able to do the first one in Thailand, where I speak Nik Noi Thai, very little, but we're making it happen. And to do the same in Australia, where they spell everything differently than us. Everything's R-E, not E-R. And I get corrected that it's not a flashlight, it's a torch. But even in that setting, we're making it happen. And it's inspiring to me to see that the tribe is out there. There are people now coming that believe in natural birth, that believe in natural medicine, that are more holistic in general, not just about healthcare, but about their own lives, right? Like, growing up, you know, we were kind of taught that you get what you get, and that little town was good enough for your family. It's good enough for you. You stay there and keep your head down, and you don't question, and you don't dare dream of something bigger. Um, but the world is different now. And I think these young people coming onto the planet are going to make a huge shift. And that's exciting, you know?
Well, Doctor, thank you so much. I mean, again, you're touching on a lot of stuff, and a lot of questions are in my mind, like firing up as you're talking. But it is interesting because you're right. There is, I don't know what it is, but there is a movement, uh, uh, almost an awakening, and you hear a lot
Yeah,
about awakening
exactly.
going on. There's talks about the Great Awakening and the Grand Awakening, but there's something going on. Whether it's about nutrition, I mean, you see more of that. I mean, as much as social media has some pros and cons to it. There's different ways to
Yeah,
look at it, but it's given the voice of a lot of experts to speak up, to share value, and to really touch more audiences around the world. With real expertise and information that may not have been accessible otherwise through maybe common channels and so on and so forth. So that's one. And whether again you're specifically talking about the giving birth and so on and so forth, but in general, I mean, there is
yeah,
that whole new flavor campaign, whatever it is. Like this is the time where people are getting like, wow, there is better things out there. Why are we not going back to the roots? Everybody's worried about their health. Everybody is thinking like, the system is not working. I mean, we see a lot more disease, illnesses, and so on, and more in the States compared to other countries. And that's the analogy, or at least the comparison you've thrown. I mean, that is a shocker. I mean, to probably a lot of people that may be in denial, like, oh, we're the greatest nation in the world. How come our morbidity and infantile, that ratios are higher than maybe a third world country or developing country. But the facts are the facts. It somehow it is happening because maybe the way we're doing it is, as you said, we're more inclined to profits, and let's make things cost effective. And I don't know if
yeah,
I think that's where
yeah,
it is. I mean, listen, from the insurance, we don't want to pay more. I mean, no insurance wants to pay more, but obviously they do because they have no choice. They got to pay for whatever hospitalization burden, so on and so forth. But there's rules that are applied, and in some areas in government programs is a little bit more regulated than maybe commercial insurance. So that's one. But even if they're not, I mean, as you said, we're very expensive to deliver babies. I mean,
yeah,
compared to other places, and that's just the hospital setting. Now, someone can say, well, we're advanced. You go to these birthing rooms right now. It feels like a home, nice. It's very casual, very comfortable, very scenic. There's music. And it's true. I mean, the rooms where my kids were delivered, I mean, they were very pleasant. I mean, and they
yeah,
convert back into like almost a surgery room in no time. Compared to my first child, literally, 10 years apart, you know,
yeah,
he was literally delivered in a surgery room. And, in my second, kid, she was delivered in one of those nice, comfy, rooms. So in a way, it feels good. But luckily, my doctor, actually, the OBGYN doctor that actually delivered my kid, was a friend. And but he was an honest doctor. I mean, he's passed on, but his legacy lives with a lot of good deliveries and stuff. And he was honest, and he tried to do the best. Now, mind you, there is, for example, my wife had an epidural, so that was a little bit of a difficult thing because she wasn't delivered. But again, that's one. And then my second child came in no time. Literally,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
funny that this is, you got to laugh about this, doc. She started, getting her labor stuff, maybe at 11ish. She was done by 11:45. By the time we got to the hospital, the doctor was not even there. Actually,
yeah,
there were
yeah,
two nurses that never gave birth, literally, and
yeah,
there was an
yeah,
attendant internal medicine doctor who was just there. So literally, that's who actually delivered my third child, and it was that kind
yeah,
of funny. Then half an hour later, the doctor came in and did all her stuff. So they took the baby, and I mean the guy was a pediatrician, doctor, and so he did take the baby, and they did all the stuff, my son.
yeah,
But my wife was waiting for the OBGYN doctor to show up, half an hour later, actually fix her up and get all the stuff done.
yeah,
It was the fastest delivery you probably, well, maybe, I don't know if it's that fast or not, but it was very quick. So it's an
yeah,
interesting concept. But so, Doc, you're in the holistic world. That's actually how it's been centuries, natural birth is really the way to go. Whether you go to the hospital or not, you're going to deliver that baby no matter what. Isn't that the rule?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've allowed fear to take over in a lot of aspects of our lives, but especially in childbirth. And really, that's how we controlled women, right? When birth was treated more naturally, women were more in control. And when we as doctors sort of took over from the midwives, and we made it a surgical act. And there have been, in the very beginning, the stories were pretty horrific, right? Women were anesthetized or paralyzed. They were tied down. All babies were pulled out of moms using forceps. And it was not a very pleasant history. And so in some ways, we've made some advances from that time, but we still utilize fear, and for me, fear is a lie. Fear does not protect you. In fact, you're less safe on that ladder if you're afraid of heights. You're wobbly, you're more likely to fall. Being afraid of snakes doesn't protect you from getting bit by a snake. In fact, it might make it more likely because you're going to react suddenly or in a loud way that's going to startle the snake, right? And fear in childbirth does not help. It's like I tell my patients, if you get a splinter in your hand, and you can take a knife and dig out that splinter, and you're fine. And then you're walking barefoot through the grass, and you step on a little pine needle that doesn't even cut your skin, and you scream in pain because fear increases your pain. Right. But when you are calm and in a state where you trust your body, you trust the process, you feel that you are cared for, then childbirth doesn't have to be this extremely painful thing. It doesn't have to be this extremely dramatic thing. I mean, there's lots of time for humor, but in today's society, if you look at movies, birth is either depicted as extremely scary, extremely dramatic, very dangerous, or incredibly funny. It's a joke. And really, while there are funny aspects like you had with, your birth, the birth itself is beautiful. There's a new human beginning the journey. And if we don't take a moment to pause, to be in awe of that, then we should find a new job. I look at some of my colleagues and I just think, why do you do this job? What? There are much easier jobs to do, even within medicine. You can work shift work. Why would you get up at 2:00 in the morning if you don't feel that you're being invited to a blessed event, that you're given an opportunity to help a family become a little bit bigger and to help a human begin the process, right? If you don't feel that way, if there comes a time where I don't feel that way, then I'm done. I mean, now I'm sort of transitioning more to teaching and doing a little more administrative work. And because as you mentioned, by building these centers, we're going to change the whole process. We're going to change the environment. We're going to change how an ambulatory birthing center or small single specialty hospital that does holistic birth, how that can operate. We can change that climate, so that how I treat birth is exactly how you can treat business. For these birthing centers, one of the primary caveats in the business plan is universal goodness. If our business plan does not benefit everyone, meaning it's not beneficial for investors, it's not beneficial for patients, it's not beneficial for insurance companies or hospitals or community, then it shouldn't be in our business plan. And ironically, when we use that belief, as anti-business as it sounds, it works. It really works. And I think that's sort of a testament to all of us, no matter what job we do, no matter what our vocation is, no matter what our mission in life is. You shouldn't hurt anybody. You should be helping everybody, including yourself. You don't have to be a martyr. But this 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 time of competition and of hurting other people to get what you need, that you take and others don't have, that's old school. That paradigm is breaking. I think now we find that, particularly in the younger generations, they get that there is enough for everyone. We live in such an abundant world, and just because you do well, that doesn't make me not do well. We should inspire one another, not push them down, right? We should lift them up. And when you do that, you lift yourself up. That's the crazy thing, you know?
Doctor, I'm listening to you, and it's interesting because you mentioned something about the question, like, why do you do the work that you do? And some of the colleagues, I think I don't know if it's just the way things evolve, but there's almost like a necessity that has been created through the system. One being that the cost to go to med school is very expensive. The post expenses that you have as a doctor are expensive. If you work in the system, it's expensive. Everything is expensive, so it's all the money, and that's, I think, what drives some of the decisions, and therefore people are more now focused on the financial aspect of things and what it means to them to make ends meet, and or maybe just live to the. I mean, obviously, being a doctor is some sort of an elite, kind of concept. It's always been that way, or at least been, promoted as such, hey, it's, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's how, like, when you were as a baby or a kid, what would you like to be? A doctor, a lawyer? That's kind of like the standard, kind of answers that you've used to get, because it's always been portrayed, I guess, explored and promoted as like it's one of the highest jobs and paying jobs in a way, and also respectful, jobs. But when you get into the real world, you realize that this is a lot of hours, a lot of sacrifice. Literally, when you think about it, doctors don't even sleep. I mean, as you said, you can be called up on any time, and you have to go. You got to go, even if you're just a regular doctor. You still got to do visits on a Saturday and Sunday. If to do your rotations. I mean, there's so many things. So it's not as people think, and so I think sometimes people lose the feel from like what they intended to do, to save lives, to help lives, into the real business, dirty, concept of it, right? And so it kind of takes and dilutes the value of what they really are there to do. I think so. A lot of it is really that, and it's become, over time and years, just a standard. You basically like robotic. You come in, a system means this. Let's get some surgeries in, and that's it. And we lose the value of like the human touch, maybe. And I think that's a problem. Obviously, we don't want to lose that, because when I hear a doctor, what I expect from a doctor, what people do expect from a doctor is like, this is a life-saving person. They're there to help people, to live better, to live healthier, to live without pain, and so on and so forth. And as you said, birth and death are big moments, and they have to be respectfully treated in accordance, at the highest level. You're receiving a new life into the world, and if someone is departing the world, as you said, the loveliest thing is to allow them to leave this world in the best way, shape, form. So it has, I think, been kind of lost in the system over the years. Now, you mentioned something that is completely probably shocking to a lot of people watching and listening right now, the idea that originally it wasn't to control the women when they deliver, which, by the way, it sounds very like brutal, because it shouldn't have been that way. It should never be that way. And not even sure why it started that way. But, to deliver someone just because you want to, do a surgery and so on and so forth, and you have to get them through a process that is very painful, that should have never happened. Now, there are laws now, there's lawsuits, there's malpractice, there's stuff. People are more cautious because they have to be extra careful. But even with that, there is ways around the system. And sometimes, you said, people may lose their personal touch. They become just robotic, just another body, just bring them in, deliver, go. You book 6 surgeries during the day and you're out, like ching ching. It's like, I'm just, jackpot for the day, right? Let's book as many surgeries in a day. That works for the system. We need to stay away from that. Now, you've literally veered out of that into the holistic, which I would call natural. Are we good with that? Is that
Sure,
so?
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So really, you went to the natural process, the old school process, which is generations upon generations, centuries over centuries. I mean, humanity all along until the last, maybe century, did not have the burden that, we have in the systems that we have. As much as we have advancements, you know, they did it. Now, people can argue, well, people used to die at deliveries because they didn't have the
Uh,
hygiene and they didn't have this and the other. So let's talk about the differences
sure.
then and now with the holistic.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've always said to my to the women who trust me with their care that I would never lie to them. I'm not going to tell them that everything is okay if it's not. I'm not going to say that it's normal if it's not normal. But conversely, I'm not going to lie to them and tell them that they're doing something that is abnormal when it's normal. And so in a hospital, they make patients believe that birth is an abnormal process. And I think what's very interesting is there is nothing that I do in my practice or in the policies and procedures of the birthing centers that we're opening around the world that is not rooted in evidence. So, ACOG supports natural birth. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology supports patient autonomy, says that you shouldn't just do a C-section or forceps or vacuum simply based on a clock, that you should look at your patient, which is the first thing that they tell us in medical school, look at your patient. And it's the last thing doctors do in the obstetric ward. They walk in and they look immediately at the machines. They look immediately at the fetal monitor, which scientifically has never been proven to improve outcomes. So I think people have this idea that when we're natural, we're going backwards, but we're actually not. We're actually looking at literature, we're looking at science, and we're basing our care on that. And, having women laying on their backs in a hospital bed scientifically is shown to improve, to increase the risk of postpartum hemorrhage, to increase the risk of a bad obstetrical laceration or the need for instrumented delivery. And yet that's what happens, right? So I think what's different now is that we do have science backing us up. I read literature. Like I said, our policies and procedures are evidence-based. And so we take the good part of what natural birth used to be, i.e. women are in control, they're respected, the environment is kind and quiet, and we take that and we combine it with science. I mean, I am a doctor. I took all those hard classes. I put in the work. I continue to read. I know medicine, and I just deliver it in a way that's more humane. I talk to my patients, right? When I deliver a baby, I didn't even realize this, but nurses pointed this out to me that I always whisper to them, welcome, thank you for coming, go do good things. And I don't even know where that came from, but I do it to every baby. It's just like an instinct. And people don't do that in hospitals, right? So I trained at Penn State University. The university trained hardcore, shirt and tie kind of guy, East Coast. And we had to do a community rotation because they wanted us to have experience of what medicine was like in a community hospital, not just a big university hospital. So I remember that I saw this one doctor who was so weird. Like she didn't break the bed down. She let women just deliver in the bed without taking it apart to make it into stirrups, right? And she would like sit down like beside her patient in the bed. And like I was like, this is weird. Like, where's all the get up? Why aren't the women in stirrups like they're supposed to be? And then I still watched her because I was really curious. And I realized like her patients were always quiet. There was no screaming. Like, the majority of her patients never had a tear at delivery. It was this quiet, gentle. She used like olive oil to help lubricate the baby's entrance. And I was like, wow. And now that's exactly how I deliver babies. In whatever position mom wants to be in, I use olive oil, or here in Thailand, mostly it's coconut oil. And the majority of women I delivered never have an obstetrical tear. I haven't had a woman have a tear, honestly, in, gosh, maybe 7 years, truly.
I guess when you
And
started this
it's,
work.
yeah, when I jumped, when I
Yeah.
decided that I wanted to live in joy. That was part of it too, right? Like, when you're constantly in turmoil, when you're constantly struggling, when you're constantly looking for things to change, that's all you see. And now I don't look for it, right? If I told you, give you 5 minutes and look for how many green things you can see, and then I ask you how many red things did you see, you saw no red things because you only looked for green things. So while I was in the hospital, all I did was I was confronted with the injustice. I was confronted with things that were happening either with other doctors or nurses or staff that were not in alignment with my beliefs. But now I'm over here. You do you, I'll do me. I'm living in joy. I'm caring for people. I'm creating options. And for those who are ready, this option exists. And there are women, there are families who aren't ready. They're not ready for an awakening. They're not ready for a natural birth experience. They're not ready for a natural death experience. They want to continue to be shielded and to not have to see truth because they've grown to be safer, confined in the fear-based systems that exist. And we should I show them love, that they're on their path, and maybe they'll come to a different realization later, or maybe not this time around, maybe another time around, right? But it really changed me when I started to live in my truth and just, I sold my house, I sold my car, I sold or gave away most everything I owned. I can pack my clothes and my belongings in two pretty medium-sized suitcases, and I still feel like I have too much. I spend my energy and time on experiences. I've been to now 13 countries. I've given talks in 4 different countries to groups. I worked. The greatest time for me during this period was one of the greatest was I worked in the Solomon Islands at a hospital up in the mountains, further from the main hospital. So it was more like an outpost. I was the only doctor, and I had a support team of nurses, and I took care of everybody. Not just babies, not just delivery moms, but hypertensive crises and strokes and men, and it got back to me to remember why I went into medicine. Like it totally reminded me of that little guy that was so thrilled to get that letter to say the medical student selection committee has recommended your admission to the Pennsylvania State College of Medicine, right? And so part of this mission is to also make that opportunity available to other doctors, to other nurses and midwives and healthcare providers, so they can get back to being that loving provider. They stop being the robot. They stop being so embittered by the system, and they remember why they chose this field, so they can go back to their lives and maybe live life a little differently, or maybe decide not to go back. Maybe they decide to be a little bit crazy like me and just change. Do what you think you can't do.
Doctor, I mean, you're touching on some real powerful stuff, and it's funny because you mentioned something about the movies and how birth is depicted, and you're right, it's very dramatic. It's like, oh my God, they're screaming, and it's like it's so painful.
Yeah.
You watch that as a young woman, you're gonna dread having a baby. I mean, it's all as anticipation of death is worse than death itself. But when you see that, that's what you're expecting in your mind, so it kind of becomes your real, and then fear takes over. And you're right, like the fear factor is where we live today in general. I mean, fear of everything, because you're designed right now, you've been brainwashed in a way, or at least, programmed to think certain way because we see it in movies, we see it around us. It's marketing one-on-one. And it's psychology. I mean, you see it enough, it becomes part, it's your hypnosis, right? So, I mean, hypnosis, you're already hypnotized to certain things in the way you see them. But love what you said is that, well, first of all, you are, I would say, unique in when I'm sure there's plenty of you out there, but not enough. And the fact is that you looked at the medicine from the angle from your young self, where your dad passed and it was a diagnosis, and you wanted to do different, you wanted to do better, you wanted to be there to help people, not to have that. That's really a big drive, because you want to make a difference. If your dad was misdiagnosed, you wanted to save somebody else from not being there, and so you took that and you took it to heart. I mean, the sad thing is that all doctors have to take their oath, and the oath is really do no harm, make sure you do the right thing, save lives, and so on and so forth. But like you said, they get into the robotic moment because they get caught into this nice, it's a very, very difficult, cycle of you basically in a storm. You can't get out of it. It's like being in a tornado, being sucked into the vacuum over and over, because you can't get out of it unless you make the sacrifices that you made, which drop everything and go. Not everybody can do that, but you were able to do that because you believe in your mission. You believe in that. And I hope that more doctors, and they don't have to believe anything. They just have to kind of stand, for what's righteous and change stuff. Now, I believe that if someone is in critical, birth delivery and they need to be saved through a surgery, I'm sure that's something that can be done. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. So we always have transport versus transfer options and decision making. So a transfer, we have a backup hospital or a hospital with higher level of care that would have an OR available for women who might need pain medicine, who or they might have slight increase in blood pressure or no longer normal, right? So they go to where people who are normal go. That's a hospital. We also have transportability. So if there's an absolute emergency, we can stabilize and transport via ambulance to a higher level hospital. And that's part of that whole pay attention to the woman in front of you. Ironically, what happens in a hospital is, it's a phrase that is truly used, pit to distress. So PIT is the short abbreviation for Pitocin, which is a drug that was never intended to be used in live births. It's a synthetic form of oxytocin, which creates contractions, and it forces contractions stronger. So we would say to the nurses in my training, pit to distress, meaning either the baby will be in distress, and so we do a C-section, or mom will be in distress because the baby's at the opening of her vagina and causing pressure. That's actually a doctor's order for a nurse to treat a woman in labor. Right? There's something wrong with that. And there's also not that one-on-one care. Our labor and delivery nurses are some of the best nurses I've ever worked with. And also they're frequently having to care for many women. So the women are in the rooms and everybody's looking at monitors on the wall. Nobody's looking at the patient. The monitors measure contractions and heart rate. That's the external fetal monitoring. And that's what has never been shown to improve outcomes. The only thing it's been shown to do is to increase lawsuits and to increase cesarean deliveries. So lawyers love it, right? But our literature says it's useless, and yet we still do it. So, for example, in our birthing centers, we do intermittent auscultation, where we actually listen to the heart rate of the baby before, during, and after contractions. So it's much more of an exam where you're actually involved, present, paying attention to the whole woman, understanding what's happening, and not looking at a computer screen. There are times when the computer screen looks great, and the reality is you're not even monitoring the baby, you're monitoring mom. So there's this reliance on technology, I think, as well, that we've given up our personal responsibility as humans, and also as physicians. I had a patient who, on exam, I felt a breast mass, and she got a mammogram, and the mammogram was negative. And I was like, I felt a mass. Like, I trusted myself more than a piece of paper. Now, in law, in court, I would be fine. I had a paper that said the mammogram was normal, but I didn't give up my personal responsibility and my clinical acumen. And so I said, let's do an ultrasound. Let's do an MRI. And we found very early stage breast cancer. She had a minimal invasive surgery and was cured. Had I given up my responsibility to technology and said, I must be wrong because a machine is smarter than I am, she wouldn't have gotten another mammogram for 5 years. And that cancer probably would have been much larger, if not spread. So, I love my iPhone. I grew up playing video games, but there's a time and a place for technology. And we shouldn't think that we're protected by technology so much, particularly at the time of birth, particularly at the time of death. Technology will never replace humanity. We have all these sci. It's a tool. It's one tool, and it should be used appropriately.
Well, Doc, you're referring a couple of times to the idea of knowing your patient. Now, that's a problem in today's medicine world in general, because the average visit is 10 to 15 minutes, not enough to even know your patient, especially if it's an ambulatory, time, like outpatient, visit, which will be like every once a year. Someone shows up, you do a quick run on them, how you doing? And most of it is asking a couple of questions, doing blood pressure, a couple of things, and that's about it. That does maybe run a lab, and even the lab work, is not really extensive. You just do the basic stuff. You don't go like the full, workout, right? So there is that. So there is not enough knowing the history, the person, and so on and so forth. Listen, my mom's been hospitalized a couple, months back, and frankly, I was like literally like, I knew her more than the doctors and the nurses, and I knew when something was wrong, and they couldn't. Like, for example, she dropped, her sugar dropped to like 30 one night.
Wow.
And had I not been there, they were waiting for their system to be like, we're going to check on her in 2 hours. 2 hours, she would have been dead, because at that time she would have been completely gone. But I was next to her. I noticed, that something was wrong because I know her symptoms and I'm aware of what. And I literally didn't care about them anymore. I gave her my own stuff. I know how to treat it. I took care of her right there. If I had waited for them and follow the protocols and do this, call the doctor and stuff, it would have been too late. But so sometimes that stuff is like, because again, the system sometimes works against you. And as you said, there is nothing better than your personal. And when you touch and you feel and you see, and it's important. Right. Which brings me to the question, especially in the OB. I mean, it's 9 months pregnancy. This is not overnight. The importance, and this is a question to you, Doc, for our audiences. What is the importance of really, the prenatal care, for both mommy and baby, in those early stages, and then we can talk about nutrition, we can talk about all the stuff, and then we can talk about post, delivery. So let's go there.
All right. Well, I think the smallest, most used measurements are measuring the belly to see the growth of the baby, listening to the heart rate, checking mom's blood pressure, and checking her urine to make sure that mom remains healthy and the baby appears to be growing normally, right? That takes 5 minutes, honestly. And that's all the most doctors do. Prenatal care is a time of preparing the family for this baby. We intentionally use the word birthing centers, not birth centers, because it's a process. It's not a one-time event. And so, if you are with a provider that you don't feel safe sharing everything with, you're with the wrong provider. I think a lot of problems exist when there are secrets that patients keep from their doctors because they feel they might be judged, or they're afraid to talk, or they don't feel like their doctor or midwife has time for them. They're rushed. And sometimes those little details are critical. I need to know if you've had surgery in the past. I need to know that. And if you've had, for example, a termination and you don't feel safe to tell me that, then I can cause great harm. So prenatal care is really a period of education. It's a period of getting to know one another, so that when that big event comes, there's already a trust. For me, there have been times when I felt like I'm not the right doctor for you, right? I'm not the doctor that you need. You want a doctor who is hardcore and will just do what he or she wants and not involve you, not make you have autonomy or decision making. You don't want a doctor to go below the surface. You want a doctor to just be a robot and be impersonal. Then I'm not the right doctor. And also, if for some of my patients, I didn't click. I didn't feel like we were on the same page. I didn't feel like I would be thrilled to wake up at 2 a.m. to deliver their baby. And I told them that they should move on as well, because I would just do a disservice to them and to myself, right? So for me, prenatal care is a large part of education about medical things, about growth, about transitioning to parenthood, about challenges, about your own childhood, your own issues with your parents, your relationship issues. All of those things come to a head during birth and immediately afterwards. So I think prenatal care is really about a larger discussion that should start very early and continue. I was just working with my co-founder of the birthing center in Australia, and she's an endorsed midwife in Australia. And we were going through what we think should happen at different points in the prenatal care. And it's funny because the things we came up with are probably not things that most practitioners think of, right? Like, well, we got to talk about intimacy issues, and we got to talk about, do they have any pets at home, and are they preparing the pets for the birth of their baby? This new life, and how is their relationship, and are they exercising, and what are they eating, and do they have any fears? We should do some meditation and fear release. And it's great to talk that way with another provider, but I think some of those old colleagues of mine at the hospital would probably think I was crazy for even considering that.
Well, but Doug, listening to you, there's nothing that you mentioned here that is out of bounds here. I mean, it's pretty logical. I mean, people need stuff that you don't think about, but you're right. If you have pets, are the pets ready? Are there, what if the pets are reactive to the new creation here and seeing
Right.
them as a toy, whatever it could happen. Listen, again, I want to give you a funny story. My daughter, she was, they're 1 year apart when my son, the third son, my last, child came in to the house. She really thought it was a toy. She actually pushed him down and flipped him over from his crib. Now that's a human to human, but I can see a dog or some other pet just, thinking, what is this creation, and just playing it. So, I mean, you're right. It sounds weird, but it's factual. There's, like you said, intimacy, how does it work? Is it, when can it happen? And so on and so forth. Because a lot of questions come to, if for anyone who has not had kids, that, this would be like, what's the question? But as you said, in the hospital system, they may not even be part of it. Basically, you come in, check up, everything's good, you're going good. 2 months out, we're gonna deliver you on time. That's about it. You're due, stuff like that. But as opposed to, as you said, you're preparing the whole system, even the mental state of your patients, because that's another thing. Meditation is something that can help. Maybe a religion can be part of that. Prayers, I don't know.
Sure.
Depends on a lot of factors, right? But that's different. Now, you mentioned midwife a couple of times. Now, most of
Yeah.
people know what a midwife is, but let's define the midwife role in history and in today's modern, because they do exist. They actually are certified, licensed to actually operate in even the modern Western medicine. So let's talk about their role, and kind of something you mentioned earlier was interesting, that before the doctors took over from the midwives. So let's
Right.
talk about the transition, just to bring our audiences closer to this whole different, a role of midwife versus an OBGYN doctor.
Sure, sure. So, if you look back traditionally, women helped other women give birth. It was like a rite of passage, and it was an innate knowledge that was passed down. And in fact, midwife literally means with woman. And so it's really relates to that initial tradition. When doctors took over from midwives, doctors ignored all of their innate knowledge, all of their traditional experience, and they made it a surgery, essentially. And it was done for control. It was done for financial reasons, and midwives were very much ostracized at that point. If we come to today's society, the majority of midwives go through a very extensive education process. They have testing, and they have a licensing process. They are fully prepared and trained to care for low risk women giving birth. They also are trained and able to care for well women without complications. So general checkups, contraception, etc. Frequently, midwives say that they protect normal and doctors don't, but I take a bit of issue with that, because I protect normal as well. There is this dichotomy, which I'm also trying to work through, and that talks about midwifery care versus medical care. And we're intentionally trying to change that vocabulary as well, where we say family-centered care, we say women-centered care, we say evidence-based care, because it's not about the midwife and it's not about the doctor. It's about the woman. It's about the family. And if we don't take care of her in that context, then we're not doing our job. So that's really the distinction. And what I hope to do with these birthing centers is bridge the gap. That doctors can learn a lot from midwives, and midwives can learn a lot from doctors. And unfortunately, the relationship on both ends have been hurt, right? There have been times where I've been hurt by midwives, where midwives weren't honest about that they were caring for a patient that I was caring for. And they would send a patient in to me, and after they were in a very dangerous situation and weren't doing the right thing. And then they run. They're not even there at the hospital. They just drop the patient off and leave. And midwives have been hurt by doctors who accuse them of being witches and doing crazy things because they're supporting autonomy or supporting natural, because they're not inducing every patient at 37 weeks, 3 weeks before their due date, because they're allowing women to eat and drink in labor, which is actually literature based. Anesthesia literature as well as obstetric literature says women should eat and drink in labor. It's like you're running a marathon, but you're not allowed to have any fuel in your body. Like, what's that about? Right? And so there have been hurts on both sides. And my hope is that in building these birthing centers in which we work side by side and we put our patient in the center again, and a lot of that will heal as well. Birth is such an amazing opportunity that is missed to heal. Like there are women, the birthday that I just supported, and she had some challenges in her earlier years. She lost belief in herself. Her first birth was very traumatic, and this birth, literally, she said, "You allowed me to heal," and I think it also can make women and their partners have a shift in their belief system, right? There are women who have had addictions, and by going through the process of birth, they realize their strength, they realize their power, and then they can utilize that knowledge in all aspects of their lives. It makes them different. It changes them. And, birth changed me. I didn't intend to be an obstetrician. I intended to do end-of-life care, and I was going to be a hardcore gynecology oncology surgeon and top of the powers that be, so I could make change. And I was going to change how death happened for women, but I was going to also be a hardcore surgeon so people would listen to me. And then I caught my first baby, and I was like, wait, right? Like there can be something powerful and beautiful in something that's heavy. Prior to that, I as a kid, I dealt with cancer and an early death of my dad, and I thought that you learn from pain and grief. But then I realized you can also learn from joy, and it's kind of a nicer way to go, So that's the part that I mourn for my colleagues who have lost their way. And some of those colleagues back in California, like they don't have any idea what they're missing, what they've lost, because they get to be at births frequently, maybe once a week, maybe even more. And yet they don't get that healing. They don't feel that love. They don't feel that power. And so I think
transaction for them.
if they did, they would be different, and they'd be happier, but again, it's like, that's their journey. And I'm not here to change anybody anymore. I don't know if you know Christiane Northrup, but she's a pretty famous obstetrician gynecologist who in the late 90s, early 2000s was the first woman to really talk about menopause. And she became sort of a celebrity doctor, and I really looked up to her, and I read all her books, and I got to meet her. And when she talked to me, she said, Rob, just because you can knock down walls doesn't mean you should. Just push them. And if they fall, then that's where you're supposed to go. And if not, then you just go a different way, go around them. And that's really inspired me. And it's really how I live now. I don't have to prove how powerful I am. I know I'm powerful. I know I can shake things up. I know I can create drama. I know I can do all that. And I don't want to. I just want to live in joy. I want to help as many people as I can while I'm here. I want to play with monkeys and see baby elephants and see amazing parts of this world and travel and eat weird food and love my life, you know, and
Well, you live in the life. And by the way, it's funny, you mentioned something about, you wanted to be this guy that makes a difference and make change. What you are making change today. You're changing, the way. You're paving the road, to a new generation of, doctors that may look up to you and your way and your style, and maybe your practice will become a more, I guess, common in a lot of areas. And maybe some folks would realize, like, as you said, maybe that's the better way to do it, because it's not just like, let me just go do the transaction. Again, that's all there is, just an operation. You come in, you do the work, and you leave. It's like there is no personal attachment to that particular delivery. In your case, it's different. There's a whole history that builds. You care, you feel, and you're attached to that, and you can see more. And you gave a great example earlier about, your intuition, your gut feeling about that. You know what you felt, and it felt right, and so you did whatever it took to make it. As you said, somebody else, like, it's not my problem. It looks good. Maybe they doubt their own, expertise. You didn't. So your stuff, your craft, and therefore and that's the thing. When you're good at what you do, you know that you're good at what you do. You don't need to prove it to anyone. And that's always, it's like, you don't have to prove that you're the boss when you're the boss. You already the boss. You're
right,
already running the
yeah,
show. You don't need to prove to anyone when you know your stuff. But when you know your stuff, you're good at it. You will be the expert, and a small touch will know the difference, and you know the difference, and you did not, dismiss. That's just an example. Now, the other thing that you stated that's powerful for our audiences to know and hear is the synergy that you're creating between midwifery and the doctor's elements being one unit, one team, because at the end of the day, you are working together to deliver this beautiful, life to this world. And it is a beautiful event, as you said. I mean, it should be celebrated, right? And we do celebrate birth, right? We have birthdays, we have,
right,
we have baby showers, we have all this stuff. So there is a lot of that happens, but when you make it work, now of course, like everything else, there's, as you said, there's things that can happen. People have fear, but if you create the environment where there's no fear, there's something that happens. Let's talk about it. Let's fix the problem, as opposed to hide the problem until it's too late, and then we have to do now immediate emergency procedures. We don't have to go to that. You do it as preventative. You avoid the chaos, right? And that's actually
right,
all that's needed, and you're doing that. So you're creating a whole system. And I love the concept that it's birthing, or birthing, institutions versus birth institutions, birth, centers, because as you said, this is not a one-time deal. This is, you're birthing people over time. You're really preparing them to get to that. And so that takes me to one question. We've talked a lot about the women that are delivering, but what
yeah,
about their significant other, their spouses? Because they're part of that. But see, that's the thing. Like when my wife was pregnant, I was pregnant with her. I mean, technically, we go through the process together. How does that work? In your world? Because for some people, it's like it's always about the mom and the baby, but the father is there. Whoever. I mean, for those that have the father, 'cause sometimes you can have insemination also. And that's another way to do it. But we're talking about just the concept when you have someone. And by the way, it doesn't have to be the father; it could be a mother too. I mean,
right,
it could be
sure.
anything. But the significant other is part of that role. So how does that relationship work in your environment in the holistic work?
Sure. So it's important that when we say family centered, we mean family centered, and we respect family, however that family is defined by themselves, right? So we always involve siblings. We talk to them. They get to know us, and we help them to understand what's happening in a age appropriate way. Um, and I always include partners during the prenatal process and during the birth process. So, I teach them how to do positive pressure in the back, counter pressure to help with pain. I teach them how to use a ancient Mexican tool called a rebozo that can support the abdomen and support mom and allow mom to hang on. I teach them to dance with their partner and to allow her to squat and hang on to him or her. I sort of remove myself, and I have the partner do the kind of support that I would normally do, right? So if I find during a birth, then I am more connected to the woman than her partner, then I'm doing something wrong. And I replace myself quickly to be sure that this is their process. I'm just that person over here and making sure they're safe, giving them support and helping them, and protecting their birth experience. It's important for us that we protect the relationship of this birthing family, and that the partner is involved, the partner is supported. At the end of this, they should feel like they are a team. They should feel like they did this together, right? And I think there's a lot of studies looking at the fathers and partners and who are involved in the birth process, who are included, and having a much different parenting style. That we talk about postpartum depression in women, but it can also exist in men. As men or as other partners, as partners to people, we want to feel like we protect them, right? That we help them, that we take care of them, right? That's what we do for each other. So if in a birth, that partner, that father or partner is made to feel helpless, is made to witness, something bad happening to the mom, and feeling like they can't help her, and that can set up a cascade of events that can be very detrimental to the partner or father's mental state. And it affects how they bond with their baby. It affects how they parent their baby. It affects how they see their relationship. It can make them question their very selves, So, again, I've said this before, but, birth is powerful. And that power cuts both ways, right? So, there was a study in Australia. They did a large study looking at birth trauma. And, there was a large number of families who experienced actual birth trauma, who had, experiences that left them feeling that they had suffered a terrible event. And so that's a big movement in Australia, is trying to, prevent that, which I applaud that, right? We're not quite there yet in the United States. In the United States, you're like, you got the baby out. Good job. You're fine. It's all that mattered. Mom's alive, baby's alive. You're good. But we should do much more than that, right?
Oh, it's funny you said that. Well, again, so that takes me to a couple of things. One thing that you mentioned earlier, and I just want to go back to it, is you mentioned something about inducing, the wife or the mom before, early on. Now, can you just for people who may not know what that means, or for potentially, mommies that want to have babies, what does that mean, and how, that should be, as opposed to, what it is being done? And that's one. Two is, as you said, the concept of, post, delivery, post baby, now the life is here, but, there's a follow-up. It's funny that you said that, we delivered, have a good day. What's the role of an OB/GYN doctor, beyond the delivery? I mean, is there a continuity of care with the mom and potentially even the baby? Obviously, the baby goes to pediatricians, but is there such a thing? In your expertise, how does that work? And in the current status in the Western world, and or in your format, the holistic version of it.
Sure. Well, first of all, the idea that we induce labor means that we force a woman to go into labor, and there's a real audacity in our doing that. We actually don't know what causes labor to start. We don't know. It's an unknown. So, you can say, oh, the baby sends a signal to mom starts to release, hormones through the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. She releases oxytocin. Okay, well then what about babies who are born early? Why would they tell the brain, why would they send a message saying that, hey, we're ready, when they're not, right? So we don't know. We don't know the precise thing, yet we have the audacity to intervene. And it's fine to intervene when there's a reason. Again, if things are abnormal, they're abnormal, and you respond. You use that science that I spoke about when it's needed. And but to induce sort of forced labor for without a medical reason, without for a maternal, a mother, or a baby reason, you're kind of playing with fire. You're acting as though you're more powerful than nature, you're more powerful than God, however you define that to be. And that's when you get in trouble. That's when doctors get in trouble. That's when we as humans get in trouble. We think we're so protected. And then here in Thailand in the early 2000s, there was this earthquake off in the waters. And suddenly the waters went the wrong way. And a tsunami, powerful Mother Nature, destroyed so much land, took so many lives. And we were helpless, right? So when you begin to think that you're more powerful than nature, you will learn a lesson. So at Penn State, where I trained, actually, you weren't allowed to do an induction unless two other doctors, other than you, agreed that an induction is indicated. And I thought that was great. That's as it should be. That protects the model. It protects the care of women. Then when I got to the community hospital, these doctors are like, well, I'm going on vacation next week. If you want me to be there, I'll do so on Thursday. And it never failed. They would start the induction in the morning. And by 5 o'clock, after they were done in clinic, they would call a C-section, do a C-section, and be home for dinner. So, it's, I think when families think that they're being induced because they want a certain birthday or because they want their doctor or because, they don't have a clear reason, and they should be very careful, because once you start that cascade, it doesn't stop. Once they break somebody's water, and then next thing you know, they got apoptosin, and then next thing you know, the baby isn't handling the Pitocin, or they turn the Pitocin up, or they just call a C-section. So, I think people should be really careful anytime somebody suggests an induction. Now, there are natural ways that you can use to try to help labor along. And one of them is actually intercourse, both mom's orgasm as well as, the prostaglandins in the sperm can soften the cervix and can help labor start. One is potentially, it sounds crazy, but you hear those stories about, oh, I had that spicy taco, I had that famous Italian dish, and everybody goes into labor. And part of that is because the bowels are stimulated and the bowels are moving. And as the bowels are stimulating, they irritate the uterus and the uterus starts contracting. So there are some natural things that can be done. But anytime you push the envelope, you need to be sure it's clearly an intervention. And intervention should only happen when they're absolutely clinically indicated. When you think about intervention, thinking about how families do interventions for a family member who's using drugs or who has a mental crisis, and they all get together, it's this big, intense thing. And it takes a lot of energy and takes a lot of attention. And you usually do it because something really important is causing you to do it, to make a change. You should have that same degree of thoughts when people mention induction of labor, because it is a big deal. So then we have the baby, and we have this beautiful moment, and then traditionally what happens is you're like, okay, see you, have fun.
And the doctor sees a woman in 6 weeks, and the woman goes home with this baby and is like, what now? Right? So what we're doing differently is we're expanding postpartum care through the birthing centers. And I'm working with my midwife co-founder in Australia to really develop a more intense postpartum period where they get a home visit on the first day and the second day. And we do a group visit on the third day so they can meet other women who have given birth within the last month or two, so that they develop a community, they have a support system. We make sure that they're breastfeeding appropriately. We talk to them about their emotions. We talk to them about their relationship. How is the transition going with their kids? We ask about their dog, right? Like we really make sure that we don't just get the baby out and send them on their way. And traditionally, that's what practices do. You know, you get a cigar, you maybe take a picture, and then see you later. See you in 6 weeks. Well, those, first few weeks are pretty intense. Whether it's your first baby or not, like you're bringing this new little life into your house. If it's your first baby, there may be a lot of like fear and concerns and questions. And if it's your second baby, now you got to deal with a sibling who's now peeing the bed after they've been, potty trained forever because is not coping well with this new baby in the house, right? So that begins this process for me of taking that power that they learned in birth and helping them to use that power in their belief in themselves to parent differently and to continue this process so that how they were changed in birth will continue to impact their lives. And that's when I believe that we have a greater significance, right? That's one of the big differences in our birthing centers, is that we're continuing that process. And we also have a nonprofit involved for women who don't have the insurance coverage or can't afford birth in one of our birthing centers. And it's called We Create Ripples. And we give pre-care or sliding fee scale care to women so they can have the birth in our birthing centers. And in turn, we ask them to do a service project in their community. So it's a hand up, it's not a handout. And we teach them that they have power. We don't take their power away. We show them, they may think when you're in not a great financial place, it's easy to lose faith in yourself. And it might be the simplest act. In Mexico, for example, we had a family and she was like, I can't do anything. I don't have any skills. What can I do? And I'm like, well, you make friendship bracelets, right? Yeah. Okay. How about we do a class for the kids in the schools and you teach them to do friendship bracelets. And then what you can do is educate them. So she taught the kids, they all made a friendship bracelet. They're all proud of themselves. And then she said, okay, now take your friendship bracelet and give it to the person to your right. So they didn't even go home with their own friendship bracelet. They went home with someone else's. And then she talked to them, what does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to be a friend to yourself? What does it mean to be a friend to your family? What does it mean to be a friend to your community or to your dog? And so she realized that she had worth. We continued to help her realize her power even after birth. And then we talked to the community or to the nonprofit where the woman worked. And we ask them, we interview the woman, we say, what did you learn about yourself? How are you different because of this experience? And then we talk to the nonprofit and we say, how many people have you helped? What have you done because this woman helped you because we helped her? And we show that there are ripples of effects beyond ourselves. And, there's all this talk about like one bad thing leading to another, a snowball effect. But I believe the opposite is also true. There's a ripples of goodness effect. That one good thing can lead to another good thing, can lead to another good thing. And so, really, that's who we are. That's who we are through the process of birth. It's who we are through prenatal care. It's who we are after birth. It's who we are in supporting families. I want this to be birthing. I want this to be a process. I want to know that I helped someone to live life a little better.
Well, you are, and for those people that are just watching, you are an actor, a philanthropist, you are a writer. You have done quite a bit, and you do quite a bit of it, and you're working with your heart into a mission to really make a difference from the start of life, in bringing people to this world in a better way, and it's making a difference, and that is really already in the works. You've been doing this for years. You're continuously doing this. You open up these new forms, of centers that can change the dynamics. You've even thought about all the financials, the aspect, and gave opportunities through these, forms that you've created, or these systems that you've created to, give back in the community and so on. So that's actually, amazing just to hear. But so one thing that you mentioned is well, you kind of talked about, the breastfeeding. So breastfeeding, is something that we've lost now. I mean, most of the women are not breastfeeding anymore. They just use baby formula. Now we can talk about the bad things and the good things in the baby formula, if there's any good things in there, because I have a theory that there's all bad things, not good things. And believe me or not, sadly, my kids actually have grown on baby formula, which I do know there's some problems there, from a nutrition perspective there, right? And then I can, I want to tie that into the 9 months before the actual delivery, because there are a lot of, I don't know if they're real or fake or myths, but there's always about, we hear about iron deficiency, we hear about calcium, we hear about teeth being, falling. And what's the real thing, and what's fake? What's really the real process that we should be looking at? I mean, if anybody out there, new couples, new mommies, or even existing mommies, that maybe having a second baby, what's there to know about the prenatal process in terms of nutrition and the postnatal process of nutrition?
Sure. Well, first of all, human babies were meant to drink human milk, period. That's the very basic, normal aspect of who we are as mammals. The very definition of mammals is that we breastfeed, right? So
Agreed.
philosophically, and what we have to look at is the industry. I will say that there are times when formula is needed, right? But those are for very rare medical indications, or for very rare times when mom cannot produce milk. In my practice, in the thousands of babies I've supported during birth, I can think of one, honestly. Other times we were able to supplement, we're able to help the milk come in. I've even helped women who adopt babies to bring on a lactation so they can breastfeed their adopted baby. There's a big movement of having milk banks. So if people need supplements, they can use donated breast milk. So they're still getting human milk, not cow milk or not, powdered formula. And we should talk about the industry of hormones, right? So what happened in the 70s? Prior to the 70s in the United States and around the world, breastfeeding was just expected. It's what you do. And then something really awful happened in the 70s. If you were rich, if you were fancy, you could afford formula. So you bought the formula. And only those poor folk breastfed. But if you were rich, you were elite, your child got formula. And that led to a whole shift in our population beliefs. I think things are changing. I believe that, breastfeeding is now considered normal by most people, but there still is a lot of work to do. In places like Indonesia, across all of Southeast Asia where I've been these last few years, you can go to a supermarket and there's an entire aisle of formula, starting at birth to adolescence. And so these kids are being given chemicals for food. Parents are led to believe that adolescents need formula, right? So like what that does for kiddos' teeth is horrible. Their teeth are rotting. What makes it worse is that in a lot of these places, families can't afford that formula. The income that they have, there's no room to buy this formula. So if they struggle to buy it, what they do is they water it down. So they don't even give the full formula. They water it down so it lasts longer. So now they're not even getting that nutrition. And so when we talk about nutrition, whether it's in pregnancy for the women or whether it's for babies or toddlers, I think, again, it's kind of basic, but we should eat real food. With the problem with over the ultra processed foods and the risk of diabetes, the risk of nutritional deficits, the possible links to blood cancers and other cancers is pretty staggering. And again, that came out of us making food an industry. We make all these ultra processed foods because they're easier. We have microwaves and we have canned everything because it was a way to be able to feed the masses, because we no longer grow our food. We no longer, even go to a butcher to get meat or know where our meat comes from or know where our seafood comes from. We live in this anesthetized world where even our food is an industry. And that's where if we get back to nature, if we get back to natural, if we get back to holistic, imagine how much better all this would be. And we're not taught nutrition in medical school. I don't even believe midwives are really taught nutrition to the extent that they should. So the idea that as healthcare providers, that we're unable or inexperienced or uneducated about the basis of food, even though, from the very beginning, the oldest doctor, one of the oldest doctors that we have on history, you might know him a little bit, Hippocratic Oath. Hippocrates said, food is thy medicine. And yet, we don't even know about it. So that's going to be a really important part of this process as well. As we build these birthing centers, incorporating nutrition in them, we also hope to educate and build these birthing centers in other areas of the world that are entirely nonprofit. So I want to go back to the Solomon Islands. I want to build a birthing center there. I sort of changed for how they were treating birth in that little hospital. I turned down the lights, the nurses turned up the lights. I turned on music, the nurses turned off music. I didn't break down the bed and put women in stirrups, they would try to put them in stirrups. So the first couple of days were a little bit rough. And then a little boy was brought in by his brothers, and he died in the river. He drowned in the river. And his brothers carried him in, and there's nothing I could do, right? But I asked what his name was, and I called him by his name. I told him that his brothers were going to take him home. I told his brothers that he wasn't in pain. I used the bulb syringe and cleaned out the dirt and the sand from his mouth and his nose and cleaned him up and wrapped him to take him home. And the nurses all stood by watching, right? And after that, I think they grew to respect me more. Later that same day, we had a man come in, and I had to do a code. I did full intense CPR to save him. And he had an accident. We brought him back and he did okay. And only then the nurses allowed me to play music at birth and allowed me to like turn down the lights and be softer and not immediately cut the cord. That's the other thing. When we leave the placenta to deliver naturally, baby gets all the blood that is supposed to be the baby's. So the baby's blood goes up the umbilical cord to the placenta, rids the toxins, gets nutrients and oxygen, and comes back down. If you cut that cord, that's the baby's lifeline. So particularly in a place like the Solomon Islands, where I don't have the ability to intubate a baby. There's no ventilators. If that baby needs oxygen, needs quote unquote resuscitation, that baby needs all of that blood, all of that oxygen. So I taught the nurses to not cut the cord. Just put the baby up on mom's belly and wait for the cord to completely stop pulsing, wait for the placenta to come out, then cut the cord. And they were amazed by that, but eventually they listened. And then a few months later, because we still are connected on WhatsApp, right? A few months later, one of the nurses texted me and she said, Dr. Robert, we listened to you. Baby came in with meconium, very bad. Baby had a passive bowel movement. Baby was really sick, was floppy. And we listened to you. We didn't cut the cord. And the baby lived. Dr. Robert, the baby lived, right? So while I talk about nature, while I talk about love, and while I talk about this touchy-feely stuff, there's also a physiologic basis. There's also a science basis. If they would have done what they normally do and just cut that cord immediately after the baby was born, that baby would have died. Because they can't intubate the baby in the middle of the Solomon Islands. And the baby wouldn't have had the oxygen, wouldn't have been able to recover. So what I find most interesting is that when we go back to nature, we find answers that we've forgotten, right? And when we go back to that and we combine that with observation and science and evolution of this practice of medicine, that's when we give the best care.
I'm listening to you. This is amazing stories that you're sharing with us, and the concept of not cutting the umbilical cord, and from the placenta at delivery. That's something that's probably like, people are probably like, whoa, because you think that's what happens automatically when the baby is delivered, but it's obviously that the baby is being fed through it while it's in the belly, but once the baby is out, you don't think about it. But just the concept that you shared is that's actually the oxygen feed, that's everything. And if that happens and the person or the baby does not any longer get that, they might just pass on. That's actually a scary thought. So at least for our audiences, now now we know. And
Yeah.
I guess in the hospital, maybe that's a protocol that's already being established. But as you said, this was, again, I don't know, but in the islands,
well,
maybe, yeah.
Sure. I mean that's a protocol that happens without any evidence or scientific basis, right? So I've heard doctors say, "Oh, if you don't cut the cord, the baby will bleed to death." That's not true. There's no physiological basis to that. The blood is enclosed. The blood goes up to the placenta and comes back down. Where does the blood go? There's something called a maternal placental barrier. Baby's blood doesn't go through. It reaches the placenta to a barrier. It gets oxygen. It removes toxins and comes back down. So where exactly is this blood going? We just, so much of medicine, especially in obstetrics, you just do what you always were told to do. Well, you're just supposed to cut the cord. Why? I don't know, you just do. But why? Right? So the more that I questioned and the more that I've had an open mind and done my own research, a simple thing like that, it makes a huge difference. It makes a difference in a normal birth as well. because it keeps the baby with mom, and it's more gentle. The baby's delivered. I make sure mom's not bleeding, and then baby gets time just with mom, just with dad or mom's partner, so that the baby feels safe and loved. You know, we come onto this planet feeling that this is a safe place and we're welcomed, or we don't. I just can't believe that babies who are manhandled or mishandled in birth and are slapped or taken away from mom and put on a cold table on the other side of the room. I can't imagine that they feel safe. I can't imagine that they feel loved, right? Babies crave being held. Babies crave connection. And so the very first thing we do is welcome to the world, and you go there on the table by yourself. That doesn't make sense. And the more that we learn even about NICU care, the more we learn about sick babies, there's something called kangaroo care, where we show that skin to skin contact can actually help these babies recover. It improves their oxygenation. It decreases their need for ventilatory support. So again, it's interesting that when you go back to nature, when you put in a little bit of love, when you put in a little bit of concern, that you're actually doing scientifically proven good stuff. It's amazing how that works.
It is amazing, phenomenal. I mean, just listen to you, and I can hear the passion and the love and the belief in the nature and the natural process as it's intended. And again, I mean, hearing you, listen to you, it just makes sense. I mean, I don't have to have any scientific background to really absorb the information that you share, and it makes sense. But you're right. Like, people are told this is the way it's done, and they just do what's being told to them. I think that's actually across a lot of, and the example you mentioned about nutrition, you don't get to learn about nutrition. I mean, some doctors may do their own due diligence to know more about that, but it's not something that is you like as part of your, formation in terms of being a doctor. That's a problem, right? I mean, because that's part of life. And I love what you said, that we live in a world of industry where, all the stuff that we eat is really, and that's actually, if you watch my stuff, you follow my stuff, reason it's all about nutrition, and it's really scary that you can't find good food anywhere. I mean, unless you go to a farm, and even that is questionable because maybe pesticides. I mean, you have to go to local guys to get the good stuff. Most of the people may not even have access to that if you live in a metropolitan area. Now, in your case, you live in the islands, you got natural resources next to you, you got some nice sea, although, I mean, some people will say that all our oceans are mercury based now, and it's dangerous levels and that high. I mean, there's some truth to that. I mean, it's amazing. Like, we really live in a world that is so polluted, so deadly. It's, no wonder why we have too many diseases and illnesses around us. And it benefits, I guess, some, but it certainly doesn't benefit the masses, because people are hurt, people are suffering, and so on and so forth. So that's crazy. And of course, pregnant women, are going through the same process. They get the same nutrition. So if they eat the wrong stuff, it's going to affect them. It's going to affect the babies. And again, you get all these problematic stuff at birth, and, and it continues on in terms of childhood and so on and so forth. Now it's interesting. You mentioned something about bleeding. Now, I guess historically we've known that women died at birth because of hemorrhaging, and bleeding. What are some of the causes to that, and how can they be prevented?
Well, we know that you're correct. The number one reason for maternal death around the world is hemorrhage. I think for me, the most important aspect of that is going through preparations with the team in the birthing centers, so that they have protocols. When you need to kick into an emergency situation, you kick in, right? So one of the major causes of a postpartum hemorrhage is basically what we call sort of a tired uterus. The uterus is a muscle, and the spiral arteries deliver blood to the growing baby, to the placenta. The uterine artery comes right off of the large aorta. So the amount of blood that's coming into that organ that's needed to grow a new life is pretty intense. So the uterus needs to clamp down to to close off the spiral arteries. When the muscles clamp, the arteries are closed and bleeding stops. If the muscles can't clamp down, that's when there's trouble. So that's the major reason. And what can cause that could be a very large baby. It could be multiple pregnancies. It could be a lot of fluid, so the uterus is very extended. It could be a very long labor, which unfortunately is usually related to inductions. People can go through 3 days of induction and then expect the uterus to still be able to function normally afterwards. And another smaller reason would be lacerations of the cervix or lacerations in the vagina that needs to be identified and sutured. And so we developed some emergency protocols for hospitals and birthing centers that are more remote. And a simple thing as using a condom attached to a syringe to fill with saline that you put inside the uterus that tamponades or puts pressure against the arteries can be life-saving. You put that in, there's medicine that we can give to help the uterus clamp down, but that simple, cheap, quick intervention, and it mimics something that's used in more modern hospitals, which is an intrauterine balloon that costs a lot of money. And a simple condom with a syringe of saline costs little to nothing. But nonetheless, that's again the business side, right? Another example of how a simple process is made into an industry. But that's one of the things that we do. The other things that we do is you stay with your patient. Like you mentioned that you talked to your mom when you were with your mom, and you were aware, you were present, because the healthcare providers weren't necessarily present or weren't necessarily aware. So during this postpartum phase, I don't need to insert fear to the birthing mom, but I need to have high level of suspicion if I feel there may be a risk of postpartum hemorrhage, so that I act quickly to prevent a traumatic loss. And I think that's part of it, is being present, being aware, paying attention to how mom's behaving, paying attention to how much blood you see, or you may not see it if the placenta is still there. You may not see it if she's bleeding behind the placenta. So it's really just being acutely present, right? And then acting appropriately. The problem that exists for a lot of maternal hemorrhage and death from maternal hemorrhage is not having the mechanical help, like not having that balloon that I spoke about, or not knowing how to use a condom to do the same, or it's not having quick response time. So mom delivers, mom's laying on a cot, they go on to other moms in delivery, and that mom is just left to lay there because they think the job is done once the baby's out. Again, baby's alive, mom's alive, cool, we're moving on. And by the time they go back to that mom, there's already been such an incredible blood loss that you're way behind the 8 ball.
Well, thank you. I mean, that clarifies a little bit, a lot, at least for me, and for our audiences, because that's like you hear, that's the biggest thing. But as you said, there is a reason for that. I mean, there's a lot of blood that's flowing there, and if there is laceration and opening, I mean, obviously, it pumps a lot of blood out, and that's enough to basically take you out. So if you could prevent that hemorrhage and at that onset, and if you're observing and watching at that point, the risk is lesser as the delivery is been done. And so it's all about that first hour or whatever, of someone being there to monitor and make sure everything is good, because that's really what things happen. And it can be prevented, as you said. You just need to know what to do, and obviously you have the expertise, and now you're teaching these simple tricks that can make a big difference in a life or death situation. So thank you for that. And so I mean, listen, Doc, I've taken almost 2 hours of you, but I mean, it's just fascinating as a discussion. I mean, there's nothing better than talking about live. Right? This is live. literally in the happening. So I really appreciate your time and you really sharing with us all the stuff and the work you do. Again, I mean, it's just, there's nothing I can do other than commend you here and really promote the work that you do. Any advice that you would give to our newly parents or parents to be, what would you tell them before we end our show today?
Sure. Well, for new parents, I would say, forgive yourself. If the birth was not what you had planned, or if things didn't quite go as you had hoped, and if you've learned anything from me talking today that makes you feel like you didn't have the birth that you would now want or deserve, you should forgive yourself that you did the best that you could have done at that time. For those of you who are about to be parents or will be parents, respect yourself. Honor your baby, honor your partner. It's okay to change providers, and be sure that you are conscious about this process and enjoy it. It will change you, and it will be an indelible mark on who you are the rest of your life. And I'm grateful to you for allowing me to share this on the show, and I'm grateful to the women who have been a part of this process from the very beginning, from the very first baby I caught in 1997 until now, and especially grateful for those little humans who have allowed me to be there when they first started their time on this planet. And thank you.
Well, Doc, spread kindness, keep doing the work you're doing. You're kind, and it's appreciated. Your energy, your vibe is coming across, even though we're 11 hours apart, and you're in a much better place than where we are, at least where I am. So yeah, like I said, I'll trade places with you any given moment. But again, keep up the great work. One day maybe we'll meet in person. And so that's it. We're closing today. So thank you, Doc, for really being with us today. It was a true honor and a pleasure, man.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so, folks, that's it. We're coming to the end of the show here. Hopefully you've enjoyed, you've learned, you've picked up a lot of stuff. Listen, this is a great thing. Birth is a beautiful thing. Let's make it, what it's supposed to be, what it was intended to be in the right way. So do your due diligence and look out now if you're parts of the world where, Dr. Biters, birthing centers are open. Maybe go check them out. And if not, maybe look at, similar processes, or at least know what to ask for when you actually are getting your, ready to become parents. That being said, I'm Hurricane H. It was a great, having this show with you guys today. And we'll be talking soon. New day, new show, new topic. Bye for now.